wonder if hopefully this time they can do the business.
Wolves fans, welcome back to the latest episode of the E&S Wolves podcast, brought to you by the Express and Star and in association with University of Wolverhampton at the Halls. My name is Jonny Drury. As always, I'm joined here by Mr. Liam Keen to discuss the goings-on down at Molineux over the last week or so. And we'll get on to a host of points, but it's probably right on today's podcast to start on a note that no one really wants to have to talk about, really. And in 2026, in modern football, modern society, we shouldn't have to be kind of talking about this and condemning this type of stuff, but we are. Wolves fans will know exactly what we're talking about, and it's the kind of the scenes, the words, the statements, and just the general situation we saw on Sunday afternoon and Sunday evening when Tolu Arakadara became the latest player this weekend to be targeted online with racial abuse following Wolves' game against Crystal Palace. It's disgusting, it's abhorrent, it's obscene. We shouldn't be seeing it in modern football. We shouldn't be seeing it in modern society. And the fact we're having to sit here and talk about it, Keno, and start the podcast on this note is just a complete disgrace for those involved in this abuse and putting this abuse to the Wolves player. And we will say as well, a number of players across the Premier League this weekend. It's a disgrace. It has to stop. If it will ever stop, I don't know. But it's a sad state of affairs when we're starting podcasts talking about stuff like this.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. Look, we both feel very, very strongly about this, hence why we made a sort of conscious decision to start the podcast with it, to sort of go straight into it and not sort of beat around the bush. Because, as you rightly say, for us to be having these conversations, and conversations for things that, don't impact us on a day-to-day life. We're two white men. It's not going to impact us. But we're part of a society that thinks and believes it should be better, and part of a footballing community that believes it should be better. And we want to try to be part of the solution and not the problem. And unfortunately, there is most of it is born from social media, and it could be a longer discussion point, really, of, the owners of certain social media platforms that do very, very little to stop these kind of things happening. And it's a social media problem more than anything. But of course, it's a societal issue as well. These things are out there. And I think, Tolu Arakadara himself in his post last night after Wolves put out their statement sort of hit the nail on the head, sort of tainting the game, tainting society, having to discuss these kind of things. And you're right, in 2026 to have these kind of conversations is ridiculous. I mean, we've come so far in so many different avenues to have to still consider a Nigerian footballer who missed a penalty in a Premier League game, which, we'll come on to and discuss and critique the actual action of that penalty. But for someone then to go on and call him, things that I don't want to repeat, to be honest, I'm not going to repeat it. The screenshots are out there for people to see. I don't want to say it myself, but for people to send in messages and send in emojis and send in that kind of stuff, it's absolutely disgusting. It's insanity to me. It really is. A couple of things to mention. First of all, obviously, we fully back as a company, as an independent newspaper, as an independent podcast, as independent journalists. We fully back initially Tolu Arakadara. We're sorry that this has happened to him, but we back him to come out the other side of it strong. And I'm sure, unfortunately, this is the sad situation. I'm sure this isn't the first time it's happened to him as well. And he'll probably deal with it really well, but he shouldn't have to deal with it really well at all. It shouldn't happen. Secondly, massive credit to Wolves, I think, in my opinion. Firstly, for dealing with it quickly, with putting a statement out, which was very, very well worded, and actually for the screenshots of the abuse that Tolu received, to actually include the sort of profile pictures and account names of these accounts that have sent in this abuse. It would be very easy for a sort of big company, a big football club, a big conglomerate, if you will, to omit those details, to sort of be scared of putting that out. So I think a massive credit to Wolves for doing that. I haven't actually spoken to Wolves about this, but I know in how the people there work and how they've dealt with unfortunate situations like this in the past, because it has very sadly happened to Hwang Hee-chan on a couple of occasions. I know that they would have spoken to Tolu. I know they would have got his thoughts and opinions on exactly how they go about it, so that he's happy and comfortable with everything that's happened. So I think the sort of the final decision that everyone made and how they approached it, I think was really, really, I think progressive in a way, and also a little bit on the attack. But it's probably got to be, because you've got these morons have got to know and got to be held accountable for it. And the final point I'll make, and I understand where some people were coming with this. I mean, I got, obviously I tweeted about it. I got a few replies and a few people replying to the Wolves statement originally saying, we're sort of giving oxygen to, faceless, nameless accounts. Obviously, I've got no way of knowing this for certain, but there is a sort of implication, if you will, that these people are sort of not from the UK, not Wolves fans. There's no evidence at all that they're Wolves fans. I want to make that clear as well. Sort of people that are abroad and just on their phones and sending messages, or even that they'd potentially bot accounts as well. Now that it's probably got some grounding in terms of actually who sent messages, but I think suggesting that we don't call it out because it might be a bot account, or it might be this, or it might be that, I think not calling it out would be the wrong thing to do. And it really would come down to a larger discussion, which we can't really have here because we'll be here for hours, but a larger discussion around social media platforms and the very little they do to try and stop these things from happening. So yeah, for me, I think call it out when you see it, continue to call it out every time you see it, continue to make the right actions. I think governing bodies have got more to do to try and stop this as well, but also the social media platforms for certain, and obviously thoughts with Tolu. And just finally, as you've already mentioned, Johnny, for Wolves to be one of 4 clubs that have had to do a statement this weekend alone in the Premier League, Burnley, Chelsea and Sunderland all having to do very similar statements because they've got players that have suffered from very similar bits of abuse this week, or this weekend rather, in this one single weekend, is really quite depressing, isn't it? Yeah, sorry we had to start the podcast on that negative note, excuse me, but I thought it was really important that we did. I thought it was really important that we addressed it and spoke about it first, because we're going to go on and talk about a game now where Wolves, didn't get the result they wanted, and Tolu didn't get the result he wanted. But that is no excuse, and doesn't warrant anyone receiving the kind of messages he received. No,
it doesn't. You have to call it out. I suppose the bigger issue around it is what social media companies don't do about this. The pressure will invariably ramp up on them. The sad thing about it is, in a couple of days' time, you probably won't be reading about any of this, and it will kind of get swept away until the next time it happens. And that is the sad situation and the sad kind of thing about it. But yeah, I think Keno's kind of covered it very well there. We send the player all our best wishes after what happened on Sunday. As Keno said, there was a game to talk about as well. A defeat to Crystal Palace, obviously a big step forward in midweek against Arsenal. Looked like maybe building it down at Selhurst Park. Selhurst Park, which is a bit of a circus, is in disarray at the moment, with Oliver Glasner's strange comments about the Crystal Palace fans and then wanting him to leave. However, the clash ended in a 1-0 defeat for Wolves. Keno, a game of kind of key moments, really. Collectively, they played quite well, but you tie together a missed penalty, a red card, and probably a mistake for the goal. And it was that was the case of a kind of summed up Wolves' afternoon, really.
Yeah, it really did. Let's start with what Rob Edwards said after the game, and he said that for him it was a sort of step forward, a progression in terms of performance. And I have to agree. I think Wolves were very good. Another point that Rob made, which I do agree with, is that Wolves, I thought, were excellent on the ball. I thought Andre was very good on and off the ball. I thought Jean-Luc Bellegarde was probably Wolves' best player, particularly in that first half. Really, really good on the ball. Really good in tight spaces. Really good sort of link-up play with wing-backs and also going central, actually, going into feet, because they quite often went into feet, into Armstrong, and that worked really well. So, and Armstrong, I thought, actually had one of his better games since he signed as well. So the sort of the whole package, if you will, of the performance, I thought was pretty good. I mean, let's be honest, based on the 90 minutes, Wolves probably deserved to win the game more rather than losing the game, really. Crystal Palace, as you say, in disarray, obviously issues with the manager and lots of other things. They didn't really turn up in that first half. I know they hit the post and they had a couple of sort of set pieces that caused a couple of issues, but Wolves had full control over that first half and should have taken a lead at half time. Obviously, Tolu gets the penalty, and regardless of what's happened, first of all, obviously, as I've already said, it doesn't warrant the messages he got, and I would never, ever make that link. But I've also got to criticise it objectively, and it was a really poor penalty, and he's got to do better than that. So and he'll know that as well. He looked, and I did feel for him a little bit, he looked devastated at full time. He really did. Not for a split second do I think that he doesn't give a damn about losing that game. I watched him explicitly at full time. It just happened to catch my eye. And then I sort of carried on watching it. And he looked absolutely devastated. So he'll know that he needs to do better in that scenario. And it was a poor penalty. But regardless of that, look, Wolves were on top, weren't they? Wolves were the better side. Wolves should have been ahead. Wolves were playing some really nice football, actually. And it looked like at a stadium in Selhurst Park where the odds of getting a win for Wolves have been really slim in recent years. I mean, the record there is dreadful, to be honest. It seemed like it was going to be a result. And then you come to the red card situation. And I'll be interested to see what you think on this as well, Johnny, because it was, a lot of people have described it as harsh. The first yellow card, which you might not have seen, that probably was a little bit harsh. There wasn't a lot of contact between him and Ismail Assar, but he gets a booking. But within sort of 3 or 4 minutes, when you're on a booking already, don't go and kick the ball away. Now, some people have suggested it's harsh and that he thought the ball was still in play, didn't hear the whistle. Obviously, only Ladislav Krejci knows that. Only he's the only person that knows whether that's true or not. But from what I saw, everyone else in the stadium knew the whistle had gone. Everyone else knew that the ball had gone out, or at least the officials gave it out. I know there's a question mark whether it actually went out or not. But what I'm trying to say is that I can understand some question marks over it being slightly harsh, and maybe it was slightly close to the whistle from when he kicked it away, and he didn't necessarily mean to kick the ball away. But I do feel that he's given the referee a decision to make. That's how I would phrase it. And once you do that, you leave yourself open for an objective decision, subjective decision rather, like the referee went and made. And I was slightly surprised that Rob Edwards was sort of critical of Krejci after the game, said that, look, it cost us. He'll learn from that. He can't do that again. I thought he might defend him slightly and sort of, even if he doesn't believe this necessarily, but maybe even lie, because that's not a criticism of Rob. A lot of managers will do this and just say, I don't think he heard the whistle or whatever, and just try and defend him a little bit. He didn't really do that, which I kind of respect. Whether it was wise or not, I don't know, but I kind of respect the fact that he was honest about it, because that's how I saw it as well. I just think he gave him a bit of a decision to make, really, and didn't need to do it.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. I think if you watch it back, like you said, you hear the whistle. I think from the player's action, the way he's kicked the ball, it kind of suggests that he may have a claim of, I thought the ball was still in play. It's a little bit silly and a bit naive from Krejci. But at the same time, it's not like the defenders kind of lash the ball away in anger over a decision, Yeah, the timing's unfortunate and maybe he should be a bit more clever, but I think the referee's got to be a bit more clever and just use a bit more common sense. He's just been booked. I get all this letter of the law stuff, but it's not like a blatant, he booted the ball away. You can categorically say that, he was doing that. The ref's just got to go and have a word with him and go, look, you're lucky. You got one more chance. If you do that again, no, you're gone, basically. And I think it opens up a wider point today of a lack of common sense among
I think it's
referees.
Consistency as well, isn't it?
It is consistency, but also read the situation. Look at it and read the situation. And I get they're under the microscope and it's fast paced and stuff, but just look at it and go, it's not that he's blatantly done it. Do I need to book him? Probably not. Do I need to have a word with him? Yeah, if he does it again. We see it in loads of different situations, don't we? Every single week. And it's obviously under the spotlight more now with VAR. But yeah, it's a weird one. But
no, I think
ultimately it cost him, didn't it?
I definitely do understand the sort of sympathy with it, because you are right. The way he kicks the ball looks to me like a player that's clearing it, not sort of kicking it away in anger.
Yeah,
so someone who's clearing the ball. There's a question mark of whether it went out in the first place. It was very tight. I can't say definitively either way whether it did or didn't go out without sort of forensically looking at the replays, but it was very close. And I do agree with all that. The problem you've got is that as I say, everyone else in the stadium knew the whistle had gone, apart from the player that's kicked the ball, which seems convenient. Secondly, I think he's just got to be a little bit smarter once he's just been booked, not to give the referee a decision to make. However, you are right as well. A referee can look at that and interpret it slightly different ways and think, right, well, he's not necessarily meant to do that, not meant to waste the time now. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. And you've got to bear in mind as well, and when I mentioned consistency, the Arsenal game in midweek, a lot of Arsenal players wasting time and kicking the ball away when the ref's not looking and getting away with things. There was a game recently, I forget exactly which game it was, but I remember watching, I think it was one of the recent ones at Molineux, and I think it might have been Hwang maybe before he got his injury or someone like that, who kicked it away right in front of the referee, not like a full-on boot away in anger, just kicked it, 5 yards, and it was really obvious, and it was right in front of the referee, and I watched the referee look at him, see it, and then decide not to give him a booking and walk away. And I mean, by the letter of the law, he should probably have booked him, really, shouldn't he? So it's also the issue of consistency, which you're going to get with sort of human error, if you will. And look, I'm massively against VAR, so I can't really turn around now and criticise human error because obviously that's what I would probably prefer, to be honest, over VAR, in my opinion. But yeah, it's that consistency can be frustrating for fans, and also within the game as well, because there was a couple of instances that fans will look at that and question the officials in the Crystal Palace match. Adam Wharton with the penalty situation. Now, by letter of the law, he's booked because it was a genuine attempt for the ball when he brings down Mane and obviously gives away the penalty. Now, by the letter of the law, I think that's probably the right decision, but he's also nowhere near it. I mean, he's not even close and brings the player down. So it depends if you interpret that as not a genuine attempt for the ball. And if it's not, that's a red card as well. So that comes down to interpretation there. And then also Will Hughes. I mean, I was not surprised at all to see him come off at half-time with Crystal Palace because he was booked already, then got into, I think it was a Mosquera incident, got into a foul there, gave away another one and wasn't booked, and the referee had a word with him. I think Wolves were asking for another book in there in that half, and he was walking a tightrope with a couple of decisions he made as well. So I could understand Wolves feeling hard done by, and certainly fans feeling that way with a couple of the decisions. But based on the performance, based on the big moments in the game, for me, it was a defeat that was totally avoidable, and it was of Wolves' own making. Wolves should have won that game, not lost it.
Yeah, it's those fine margins, isn't it? And, a lot of Wolves games, defeats have been tight this season. They haven't been battered, and they have come down to those moments, whether it's Wolves not, turning an opportunity into a big chance, or, a mistake ultimately come back to bite them. And there have been a few times, certainly under Rob Edwards' time in charge, where a result or the manner of a performance is kind of summed up Wolves' season and the differences between, them and other sides in the league. And Sunday was kind of one of those, wasn't it, Keno? In terms of, they've lost, they haven't been blown away. They should have, like you said there, on another day they would have won the game, but they haven't. And that is kind of the story of the season in some ways.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you sort of talk about progression is the key word we've spoken about quite a lot, isn't it? And it's something that I think to a degree we've seen under Rob Edwards. Understandably, I think fans have also been critical and concerned, if you will, about other areas where we haven't seen that. Look, I agree with him. It was progression in terms of the performance against Palace, absolutely. But it's just getting over the line in those certain situations. I mean, it's frustrating, really, because I think Wolves should be on more points than this, absolutely. But they did enough to stay in the Premier League, no. And this is ultimately, there's lots of context to that. It's not solely down to Rob Edwards. However, he's not sort of made maybe the sort of impact that he would have wanted when he first arrived at the same time. And then you look at the importance of how you take this moving forward as well, because we've got, obviously we're going to preview it later in the podcast, but we've got Villa on Friday night, which is, for obvious reasons, always going to be a big game under the lights at Molineux, etc. After that, you've got Liverpool on a Tuesday night at Molineux, again under the lights at Molineux, one of the big six. Going to be a good atmosphere, an opportunity. I know Liverpool are of a good side, but they're very inconsistent this season, and certainly an opportunity. You've then got maybe the biggest game of the season for Wolves, because obviously they're already down. Liverpool again at Molineux Friday night. in the FA Cup 5th round, an opportunity to get yourself in a quarter-final, the opportunity to put yourself within touching distance of a trip to Wembley, of course, depending on the draw as well. That's a massive opportunity and a real game of cat and mouse, really, in terms of whether you play a stronger team and what Liverpool play and how you navigate those two double-header fixtures against Liverpool at Molineux. You then go into Brentford on a Monday night away from home, which is a kind of intriguing game, really, because Brentford have actually had a much better season than I thought they would do, and credit to them. And that becomes a sort of potentially banana skin difficult game. And then, as we've discussed on this podcast several times as well, if they don't get through in the FA Cup, they've then got 4 weeks between, or just under 4 weeks between that Brentford game and West Ham in the second week of April. Of course, if they get through in the FA Cup, they'll have 3 weeks between the Brentford game and the FA Cup game. So you're in a situation there where, I mean, I don't want to use this word because it sounds very negative, but I think it's probably right. I mean, realistically, there is a probability of Wolves going 5 games, well, 5 defeats rather, in a row, and then going into a 4-week break. Now, I'm not saying Wolves will lose all 5 of those games, but that's obviously including Palace as one of them. But the bookmakers would probably have Wolves down to lose all of them, or at least be odds-on favourite to lose all of them. You know, lose to Villa, lose to Liverpool in the league, lose to them in the Cup, lose to Brentford in the league. And because of the Palace game that's just happened, you've got 5 losses in a row going into a 4-week break. And then you're into the penultimate month of the season. So, look, I think Wolves will have a better outlook after these next 4 games than what I've just described there. I'm just giving you an example of what is a possibility to happen. And that would be a really difficult 4-week break there for everyone to mull over. And that leaves Rob in a situation where he's got to try and claw back some momentum, claw back some positivity going into the last final stretch of the season. Really, so he's given a real crack at next year, but also to keep the fans on board. And that's why these next few weeks leading up into March is going to be really, really key for how Wolves' sort of back end of the season goes, in my opinion.
Just in the short term, there was a chance to build a bit of momentum, kind of got a point against Arsenal, scuppered, some of their kind of title race ambitions. And, it was a massive result, probably arguably one of the best of Wolves this season. And then the result at Palace kind of sets you back. But given the fact the performance was decent, Keno, is there still a little bit of momentum moving forward now to what is, let's make no bones about it, tough back-to-back games against Villa and Liverpool? Yeah,
there has to be, I think, because obviously the Arsenal game, which we'll come on to in a second now, I think for that, the obvious reasons was a real positive. I think there's lots of positives to take out of the Palace game, regardless of the fact they got the big moments wrong and ended up losing the game. Look, Wolves weren't beaten by Palace. Wolves were beaten by themselves. Wolves lost that game based on their own failures, not because of anything Palace did. And for that reason, I think it, as frustrating as it is, it does give you a little bit of a platform as well. And look, someone like Bellegarde that I've spoken about on this podcast briefly already, I'm going to ask Rob about him later in the week at the press conference. I thought he was excellent at Palace and has actually had a couple of decent games now, and I expect him to keep his place going into Villa. And there's lots of sort of different sort of storylines coming out of this, which will be really sort of, I suppose, interesting as to where we go. I mean, one thing to mention actually before we go on to Arsenal, just to finalise this point and look at, I know your sort of question was based on sort of momentum and positivity, and I do agree with that. There is something you can take into Villa, and I think for a lot of reasons, the derby game is a bit of a leveler anyway, and hopefully with it being a Friday night under the lights at Molineux, it gives everyone an opportunity to sort of be really up for it. Someone who needs to be really up for it, in my opinion, is João Gomez. Now, actually, I think he'll probably be on the bench if I'm going to put my money on it, because he's been on the bench for the last couple of games, didn't come on at all against Arsenal, and then came on late on against Crystal Palace. And I'm going to caveat what I'm about to say by saying this, that João Gomez is a player that, yes, of course, he's going to go, and we expect him to go. There was a potential of him going in January with him wanting to make sure he gets into the Brazil World Cup squad, but he was never going to be a player that was going to throw his toys at the pram and kick off and refuse to train or anything like that. He's a player that I absolutely know for a fact cares about this football club, wants his football club to do well, has an affinity with the fans, has an affinity with the club, is pretty well liked, easy to get along with. So for not a split second am I suggesting that he's a difficult character, because he's absolutely not. And he's got Wolves' best interests at heart. I know that for a fact. I've spoken to people around that, have knowledge of that situation. I've spoken to lots of people. He's obviously been at the club a few years now. I know that for a fact. But what I saw when João Gomez came on late on against Crystal Palace, in my opinion, was a player that was just not up for that when he came on. I know he was late on. I know he's not, he's not had a lot to do, or not had a lot of an opportunity to do a lot, rather. I should phrase it like that. But for the goal, now Thatcher was probably slightly out of position. There's a couple others that maybe could do slightly better. But João Gomez just lets Evan Gesson just run off him into the box, and he's walking. He's not even he's not even trying to track the player who then scores the goal. That's not João Gomez. That's not like João Gomez. That's not the kind of player we see. And I tell you what else is not the kind of player we see. And obviously, I didn't tweet this, and I was very careful about how I spoke about it in the post-match video briefly. I'm going to be very careful how I phrase it here now because of what happened last season and Matheus Cunha. I didn't see what happened after the game. I'm imagining that João Gomez sort of probably clapped the fans for a little bit and then started heading off. But what I did see is I looked up from my laptop, and while the whole squad and Rob Edwards were by the away end, he was shut off going down the tunnel on his own. Now, I didn't see what happened before that. As I say, I'm sure that he probably did go and see the fans. I don't have any evidence that he didn't. I don't have any evidence that he did either, but I would imagine that he probably did. But I just felt his body language and the manner in which he was very quick to get off that pitch, and the fact that how he played when he came on and how he was at fault, or partly at fault, for the goal, saw a player for me that had really poor body language in that moment. And I think it's a poor moment from a good player and a good character. And I just think we need to see a lot more from him, really. Whether he's on the bench, whether he's starting, we need to see a lot more. And let's be honest, he's not been in form for quite a while now. He's had the odd good game here and there, but for quite a while now, he's been struggling for form. And for me, it was a disappointing cameo, both when he came on and when he left the pitch. For me, I just think he's better than that, and I think it's worth mentioning.
Is it maybe a reaction for not being in the side? Obviously, I think there was a reason why he wasn't in the side on Wednesday night. Like you say, he's out of form a bit, but played on Sunday at Grimsby on that heavy pitch. But is it a reaction, Keno, to kind of not being in the side? This is hypothetical, isn't it? And it's kind of opinion based because we don't know because we haven't spoke to him. But I don't. From what you've said there and from what I've seen, it's not going to be a case of downing tools. But is it a reaction to just being left outside in the last few games?
I think it probably is. I think so. Yeah, it seemed to me like a player that was frustrated of not having the chances. Of course, as you say, I'm not in his head. This is sort of speculation, hypotheticals, if you will. But it seemed to me that was the case, and it's just for me very unlike João Gomez. It's not what his sort of character and personality and commitment is, because he isn't that kind of person. For me, he's someone who's very, very committed. Someone I've got a lot of admiration for. I think he's a very good player. For me, look, he's not been in good form, absolutely, but I genuinely believe he can play at the highest level. I think he's that good on his day, and I hope he goes on and does that. I know some fans will disagree with me there because he's been part of a squad that's going to get Wolves relegated, but I don't think he's necessarily been for a want of trying. But on this one occasion, I was just disappointed with what I saw. I didn't see a player that had that sort of usual commitment. And if anyone else has noticed that in the football club, I'm sure that he'll be told. And by the way, even if no one else has noticed it, João Gomez will know it, and I think he'll pick himself up. I don't see him doing that again. I don't see him acting like that again. I see him, whether he's on the bench or starting, I see him picking himself up and giving it a good go. So hopefully just a one-off, but something I thought was worth mentioning because first I noticed it, and secondly, he's not been performing well, and that's probably played a part.
Just a quick reflection on Arsenal last midweek. We've obviously done a video since then and kind of talked about the game, but we haven't done a podcast since then. Obviously, a cracking comeback. I think a lot of what we summed up last week was kind of they got it wrong in the first half, but Rob Edwards responded, and that was showed that he can be versatile, although it was kind of thrust upon him with an injury to Angel Gomez, and it was a kind of good moment in a bad season. The highlight of it was obviously Tom Adosi's goal. Fantastic scoring late on. Just moving it on, he is a player who obviously you haven't seen an awful lot of. He's made a big impact already with that goal. Can you see a world kind of next season where Wolves are maybe not building a side around players like Edozie, but they have a big part to play, and they are maybe the ones that will benefit from Wolves dropping out of the Premier League?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think so to a degree. I mean, yeah, you're right. Look, I think Rob Edwards got it wrong in my opinion. Obviously, was forced to make a change. Wolves were a lot better, and you said it to me during the game. You said, "Look, Arsenal are going to be made to pay here. Wolves are going to get another goal," because it seemed for all of our money that Wolves were going to get back into that game. And obviously, you get into the 94th minute and think it's probably not going to happen. You've gone through the Arsenal time-wasted tactics, and then there he is. I mean, it's a mistake first of all, obviously with Raya coming for the ball, but Tom Edozie initially. Really, really good technique. The way he gets his sort of knee over the ball, gets over it, make sure the shot's low, catches it really nicely. Obviously, a small bit of fortune, if that's what you want to call it, with the way that it bounced off Calafiori, off the post, back off the defender again, and then in. But yeah, really, really good moment for him. A player that I've actually watched for the 21s a few times and actually been quite impressed with him. But I never interviewed him, never spoke to him. I didn't know too much about him, only from what I've seen for the 21s. And it was someone that I always thought, I wonder whether he'll get that chance. I've never really known how far or how close he would be to that. Obviously, to see him on the bench recently, and you wonder whether that chance will come. And it was an inspired opportunity, wasn't it? Fair play to him. As I said on the video, saw the Wolves signed on a free from a sort of grassroots academy in London for him to then go and make that moment, if you will, take that moment against the league leaders, probably the champions elect in Arsenal, to get a goal was a magic moment. And yeah, I think it's important to move it forward. Yeah, because you said we've not done a podcast since then, but have done the videos and everything. And what does it mean for Wolves? It means that they've got a Mateus Mane that's come through and been fantastic. They've got Edozie that's come through, had his big moment. They've got some other players in there that are sort of in and around it, and you wonder whether who will get a chance. And and we've obviously spoken to Rob about this recently as well, but Wolves have to make good use of their academy, in my opinion. And they've done it sort of sporadically with players like Hugo Bueno's come through and obviously been around it. Morgan Gibbs-White in recent years. Max Kilman, although he came to the academy a little bit later anyway, but Max Kilman in recent years. But otherwise, there's been a few players that have come and gone and been sold and gone elsewhere. They didn't quite sort of make it at the level. And I just hope that there might be a few others that can really come through and shine through, because Wolves are going to have to take advantage of it, because it's going to be a massive summer of turnover of players, and you're not going to be able to, first of all, you're not going to sell everyone, but you're not going to be able to sign or spend big money on every single player as well. You're going to have to be clever about the way you build the squad. And for me, that has to include some academy talents. So yeah, I think for a couple of them to potentially be coming through now and have a couple of opportunities could only be a good thing moving forward. And let's see how Tom Edozie gets on. But yeah, I mean, he's clearly a very technically talented player. So yeah, exciting times ahead, hopefully.
Exciting times indeed. Some positives in a pretty bad campaign. Keno, let's talk about some off-field stuff again, which has caused a bit of a stir in the last few days. Wolves fans would have seen the videos doing the round from the Arsenal game of two YouTube streamers that were in the ground on Wednesday evening. I think they had Wolves shirts on and kind of took them off and unveiled some Arsenal shirts after Arsenal had scored. In the kind of Wolves end, there's a lot of kind of flack going towards Wolves as a club after that, saying how these guys have been allowed in and all this, and it's embarrassing, this, that, and the other. Keno, I think you've got a bit more information on this for us, but it's weird that we're talking about it, but it has caused a bit of a stir in the last few days. What was the situation around it? How's this kind of, maybe been allowed to happen, and yeah, the kind of fun poked at Wolves almost.
Yeah, bear with me on this one, because it's probably quite a long explanation. I've got an email to read out as well, which I think will give a bit more context. But I understand the criticism, because I've got some criticism of it as well. It is a bad look for Wolves. I think a lot of people at the club really regret the situation. When you've got fans paying, so much money to go to a game, and you've got fans sat out in awful conditions in weather, sat in the Graham Hughes stand with ponchos on, spending their hard-earned cash to come and watch the football club, and the fact that Wolves are going down and it's been a torrid season. It's it's not a good look to have two. I'm guessing they're American. I heard their accent. I don't know if they were American or Canadian, but I'm guessing they're American stream. I'll be honest, it makes me feel old because I had no idea who they were. I'd literally never heard their names or seen their faces before in my life. I mean, based on what we saw at Molineux, they're two absolute idiots. But I've got no idea who they were. And yes, I definitely do feel old. But yeah, I think to have them sort of, come to the game, have free merch, free food, free drink, free tickets. I understand that, every business has sort of a commercial arm to it, and it's all part of building, long-term revenue and long-term attention and all, and that's totally fine. But it is a bad look when something like this happens when you've got fans obviously paying all that money. So I do totally agree and sympathise with a lot of the criticism towards it. But it's also really important that you put context to it, because it's not quite the situation that fans assumed it was. So first of all, these two guys were not invited. They got in touch with the club themselves, explicitly with the club themselves, to say that they wanted to come and experience a Premier League game. They wanted to come and they weren't fans of either club, and they wanted to come and just do a stream about the game and watch the game and all this kind of stuff. So that's the first thing to mention. Wolves did not invite them; they asked to come. Then there was some people in the sort of department at Wolves that ended up making it took it upon themselves to make it a reality to invite them to, well, not invite them, but say that they could come to the game and make this whole thing a possibility to happen. And they were given sort of certain promises about how these two individuals would behave, and that is the opposite of what they ended up doing. So Wolves did not expect them to be behaving the way they were, to be goading fans, to be celebrating Arsenal goals, to be doing all of the things they did just to try and get a bit of attention and some clicks and some views, which unfortunately they've done their job, haven't they, by bringing attention to it, because we're talking about it, everyone else is talking about it. And it's come from, there's really good people at Wolves, really good people behind the scenes that work really hard and try and do the best for the club. People in positions of making decisions, like having these two individuals at a game who are Wolves fans and people who only want the best for the club. It was not in any way deemed to insult fans or to disrespect the club or anything like that. And I know that there are individuals at the football club that after this happened felt real sort of personally responsible for it, were mortified by the situation and sort of attempted to rectify it internally with the football club. And I do feel really sorry for them, because they've been massively let down by two liars, basically, who have lied about how they were going to approach this streaming to the game. So I have to, that's the context that I think is really important. I understand the criticism as well, because at a time when fans probably don't feel like they're getting bang for buck, fans feel like they're being mistreated to a degree, if you will, if that's the right way to phrase it. To have this happen when fans are paying their hard-earned money, I totally get that, and I do sympathise with it, because it is not a good look for the club. But I also know there are individuals here that have been let down and messed around, really, that feel terrible about the situation. So I'll finish the point by reading out this email. So bear with me very quickly, because it's a fairly long email, but I'll read it quickly for you. So just to give a bit of context, obviously some fans contacted the club, complaining about this situation, understandably so. And Wolves responded to these fans with this email, which hasn't been put out as a statement, but I have got the email in full, which I can read out now. And I think this will give a bit of context as well. So, dear supporter, we understand and share the concerns raised following Wednesday night's match regarding the conduct of two individuals who attended as guests of the club. Firstly, we want to apologise to supporters who were angered or offended by what took place. The behaviour in question was unacceptable and fell well short of the standards we expect from anyone attending Molineux. For clarity, these individuals were not invited by the club. Their representatives approached a member of Wolves staff requesting the opportunity to experience a Premier League fixture, assuring them that they were not supporters of either team and that they would respect club regulations and our supporters. They were explicitly informed that opposition shirts or branding would not be permitted in home areas and that appropriate behaviour was a condition of attendance. Those assurances were given and subsequently broken. That does not absolve the club of responsibility. The decision to accommodate the request was made in good faith, but should have faced deeper scrutiny. On the night itself, the situation was managed with supporter safety and de-escalation as the overriding priorities. Wolves' digital, media and marketing teams will always look to grow our audience and showcase the club to new supporters around the world. Like all modern football clubs, we occasionally work with partners, guests and content creators, either to support charitable causes, celebrate community initiatives, or to introduce new audiences to Wolves in a positive way. These arrangements are not entered into lightly and are always expected to reflect the values and standards of the club. However, they should never come at the expense of respect for the match-going fan base, who are the heart of this football club. We are reviewing our internal processes around third-party guests and content creators to ensure this does not happen again. The individuals involved will not be welcome back to Molineux. We understand the strength of feeling because we share it. Wednesday night should have been a celebration of an excellent comeback and a hard-earned point against the Premier League leaders. We are sorry that, in this instance, that focus was disrupted by such cynical and disrespectful behaviour. So yeah, apologies. It was a long email there to read out, but I think it was important to give fans the full reading of it there. And I do think actually that Wolves have phrased that quite well, because they're not absolving themselves of responsibility. They're still taking some of the flack themselves, which they rightly should take, because clearly it was regrettable. It was a mistake. But at the same time, they've also been let down by a couple of idiots who have taken advantage of them, basically. And that's where we find ourselves. So I think it's important to sort of draw a line under it there and hope that the club sort of learn from it, and maybe do a few things that can get fans back on board. You know, do a few goodwill gestures over the coming months, going into a really crucial summer where Wolves can just try and get a few fans back on board and sort of feeling that love again.
On that and things that could get fans back on side, ticket prices have been a topic of conversation in the last few days, Keenan, on the back of a fan advisory board meeting. Ticket prices were talked about, a potential kind of whether they will stay the same, whether they'll go down, this, that, and the other, you know, given the fact that Wolves are going to be in the Championship next season. Keenan, what can you tell us, and can you give Wolves fans any kind of good news, or how do you see it kind of playing out?
Yeah, so for people watching on YouTube and seeing the clips here, I apologise while I will be looking at the fan advisory board notes while I'm speaking. So just trying to ignore the fact that my eyes are going to be going back and forth while I'm reading some stuff out to you. But obviously, I want to make sure I get it all correct for you. So yeah, I'll be honest, I was a little bit surprised when I saw a lot of the fallout here, because and this is no criticism at sort of any individual fans or anything like that, but it is a case. It's sort of what social media is in a nutshell, isn't it? People have taken sort of, you know, a small part of sort of an overall document, if you will, and sort of maybe taken it out of context a little bit, or misinterpreted it and sort of ran away with it a little bit when they probably didn't need to do that. So the bit that fans were unhappy with was this paragraph, which I'll read out now. Nathan Shee acknowledged the strength of feeling. This is around ticket price, of course, and the fan advisory board, and they were basically sort of advising on or giving comparisons and discussing what the prices should be and giving some examples. And he said Nathan Shee acknowledged the strength of feeling and confirmed that no final decisions have been made. He stressed that pricing must be considered as part of a longer-term strategy rather than a single season reaction, particularly if the club is targeting an immediate return to the Premier League. He also noted that communication around any pricing structure must be handled carefully while the team is still competing this season. So what some sort of critics of that, so if I can get my words out, what some critics of that interpreted it is him saying that ticket prices are not coming down when Wolves go to the Championship, and that or they'll go down by, or they'll even go up, or whatever sort of, however the way these people interpreted it. I didn't interpret that in any way, in that way at all. I interpreted it as the prices will come down, but they'll come down to a certain degree with an idea that they're going to have to go back up again when Wolves go back to the Premier League, if Wolves go back to the Premier League, because all of the sort of noises out of the club, particularly from Nathan Shee and other people in positions of power, has been that we want to jump back to the Premier League straight away. First time I'm asking, we want to bounce back instantly. That's what they've said. So with that in mind, that's essentially what he's saying there. Now, obviously, I've spoken to people since then and tried to get some clarity on the situation, and the clarity is essentially that we're expecting the prices to come down if and when Wolves' relegation is confirmed, and but they'll obviously come down to a certain degree with an idea that they're going to have to go back up again. Now, they can't come down to a degree of being in the bottom 8 of Championship prices, because when they go, if Wolves were to get promoted again, they're going to have such a massive jump up that jump up in itself in 18 months' time is going to be massively criticised, isn't it? So that's where they're trying to find the balance. Essentially, I think it's logical to come to the conclusion that they're going to come down fairly considerably. They won't stay the same as the prices in the Premier League. They won't go up from the prices in the Premier League whatsoever. And I would suggest it's logical to look at it as, or interpret it as, the prices will come down fairly considerably. Now, obviously, how much that is, we will find out. I think the last sentence, if I go back to that last sentence, in that was really telling as well. It said, he, as in Nathan, also noted that communication around any pricing structure must be handled carefully while the team is still competing this season. Essentially, what he's saying there is that it's difficult for the club to confirm championship prices now when they're still mathematically not relegated. And I understand that, because, you know, for the players and the coaching staff and everything, if the club start communicating championship plans publicly while they're still technically a Premier League club, it's not a great look. So I do understand that. I think once Wolves are sort of mathematically down, that is when things will probably start coming out a bit more in the public sphere. So yeah, I think that's important to mention. And then a sort of final point on this as well is, I've only just read there the last paragraph of this document around the pricing. What other people haven't really taken into account is the rest of the words above it, which all talk about ticket pricing as well. And what does it talk about? It talks about everyone's favourite word, the word that Jeff Shee was massively criticised for previously, benchmarking. And it talks about, I'm reading again verbatim here from the document, benchmarking comparisons were discussed, including pricing at other championship clubs and Wolves' own pricing during the 2017-18 championship season, adjusted for inflation. Again, what that's telling you there, without giving you the figures, because as I say, I don't think the club are going to want to communicate it while they're still mathematically not relegated. Essentially, what that is telling you there is that Wolves are going to look at the pricing for other championship clubs, other clubs that will be trying to go for promotion as well, benchmarking it in a similar sort of vein. You're probably looking at similar sort of prices, and the prices will come down. I think is the only logical sort of interpretation of that. Now, as I say, we're going to find out more in the coming months once we get everything communicated to us properly. But I think it's fair to say that the prices will be coming down. They won't be staying the same or going up. And by the way, if they were to stay the same or go up, I'd be the first person to massively criticise that, as I was when Jeff Shee did those massive price hikes in the first instance. And me and Nathan at the time went really hard criticising that. So yeah, I think that hopefully that should allay a few fears and give a bit more context to the situation. Now, obviously, people can critique it at the time when the figures come out, whether they think it's too expensive or not. That's up to them. But I would think it's logical to assume that the prices will definitely be coming down.
There we go. Hopefully a little bit of good news for Wolves fans to come in the coming months. Right, time for a shout out for our sponsor. As always, the E&S Wolves podcast is brought to you in association with University of Wolverhampton at the Halls. And here's a rundown of some of the events that are taking place, with tickets going on sale on Friday. Freya Sky with her Stars Align tour is in Wolverhampton on the 1st of November. Those tickets, as we said, available on Friday. Also available this week, Nurse Georgie Carroll and her Infectious show is taking place on the 17th of October. Paul Smith with his show Happy is coming to Wolverhampton on the 4th of July. And again, those tickets go on sale this Friday, as do tickets for Fun Loving Criminals Live with Di Fontaine Orchestra. They are coming to town on the 11th of September. You can get your hands on some tickets from this Friday. Right, Kino, let's take some questions from Wolves fans. We've had one sent in on an email. We rarely get them on email, usually on Twitter, but we've had a good one on an email. It's come from Damien, who has said, when Jeff Shee was chairman, he always claimed he was a good friend, had a working relationship with football agent Jorge Mendes, which we obviously know about. Hence the reason Wolves and Fosun have used his services in the past. Do you think that relationship will continue now with Nathan Shee as chairman and with the club also facing an inevitable relegation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So thank you, Darren. I appreciate that. I'm actually in the process of sort of writing a bit of a story around this at the moment, or researching a bit of a story around this at the moment. So I was thinking of doing a sort of a section on the podcast about this, but decided I'll wait until I'm a bit closer with this sort of article that I'm researching. So for the time being, I'll sort of give an answer to the question rather than go into too much detail. But there will be more hopefully to come on this at some point in the next sort of few weeks or so, depending on how things go. But yeah, I think it's a really good question. So yeah, obviously there's always been that sort of working relationship there. Now they've not used him for everything. Obviously he was heavily used when he first came in, wasn't he, with all of the Portuguese sort of players there. That sort of relationship maintained. There was a spell when they sort of moved away slightly under him, but they still used him as they would do any agent. And you're probably sort of in a sort of middle ground situation at the moment because he's not, as I say, he's not used for everything. But what's really important, because there's not a lot of guest a few clients in this Wolves squad. I mean, there's Matt Doherty and Jose Sarr off the top of my head. I'm trying to think if there's any others. That might be it. As I say, I've not done the research to check on this, but I think there's not many when there used to be the majority of the squad before. So that's obviously a change. However, he's clearly very, very influential at the football club still. Clearly. For him to, and this is no criticism of George Mendes, by the way, because look, if I had his money and I was as successful as him in doing what he does, then fair play to him. But he's able to insert himself into deals that have got nothing to do with him. He's been able to bring players to Wolves when he's not the agent of those players. He's brokered deals for that. He's been able to broker the deal for Jorgen Strand Larsen to be sold to Crystal Palace when it should just be Matt Jackson as a technical director, negotiating that himself, and it gets brokered to a agent that is taking a certain percentage off the top and getting some money for himself, in a situation that doesn't really make a lot of sense, and I don't understand why he needs to be involved. And that really opens itself up to a sort of deeper sort of investigation or comment or critique on Wolves' relationship with him. Like he does this in other places as well. Don't get me wrong. As I say, it's not a criticism of. I don't know him, obviously, but he's making great money and he's able to go and have a successful career with it. Fair play. Why Wolves should be allowing that to happen, I don't really understand. And you've got to remember, he's taking percentages off the top every time he's brokering deals that've got players that have nothing to do with him. He's not Larsen's agent. Why is he negotiating to get Wolves' fee for selling him to Crystal Palace? He shouldn't be. So that's I think a really important thing to mention. So as I say, something I'm going to go into a bit more detail on in the coming weeks and months, depending on how my sort of research goes and looking into it. But yeah, that's important to mention because there's clearly that influence there. That's clearly that relationship still there, and I think how much he's involved under Nathan Shee as currently interim chairman, but probably going to be full-time chairman or permanent chairman, and if all goes well, how much he's involved going forward, I think we'll know a lot more based on how this summer goes. And if you're asking me to bet my house on it, I would say that he's probably going to be involved.
Yeah, cheers for that question. Lone Wolf has asked, is there a point in which the club may consider that Rob Edwards may not be the man for next season, or is that set in stone? I feel he doesn't have the full support of the playing staff. This shows at the end of games when he walks alone, clapping the fans. Is he going to be in next season, Keen, or is that 100%? Or is there a world where Wolves may just turn to someone else?
Yeah, just on the last point of the question about him sort of clapping the fans and stuff. And to be fair, he does do that a lot on his own all the time. Like he'll go with the players, and he was with the players at first. Goes and does it, but then he always walks really close to the away end, or even right by the barriers at Molineux as well, and claps and walks around and claps on his own. He's always done that. It's not. I don't think that's a reflection on him being left alone by the players. That's something that he's done since his very first game here. So that's important to clear up. But yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's definitely a world in which there's a change made. I think you'd be silly to say that he's 100% going to be here next season, because I don't think you can ever have 100% in football. Of course, there's a world in which that's a possibility. Do I think it's a probability? Probably not. But it's going to depend. Again, comes back to our earlier point about the next few games and then going into that 4-week break and then the back end of the season. It depends how you end the season. You've got 10 Premier League games remaining. If you go out of the FA Cup next and then don't win any of these last 10 Premier League games, or let's say you lose 8 and draw 2 or something like that, I mean, does that leave you with a decision to make? I think there's an argument that it does. I mean, to what degree are you taking any momentum into the summer? Whichever players remain there, to what degree are they on board? So there has to be question marks there about it, but it's probably early to go into that. I think he needs to have that time with these next few games to make his mark, really. But yeah, I don't think you can suggest that it's 100% safe. But I think that the plan from the very beginning has always been to take him into next season. So that's always been the plan. That's the probability of what's going to happen. But let's see how he goes. And bear in mind, actually, that the man who brought him in, Jeff Shee, is no longer at the football club. So the people at the football club now can make a change because it's not their decision to bring him in the first place. So he hasn't got that protection as well, which I think is important to mention. But the odds are he probably is here, but it just depends on, of course, how the back end of the season goes.
This next question kind of leads into that as well. Cool Hand Aid has said, remember under Nuno feeling confident about competing and getting results? We just expect to lose going into games now, which is terrible to say. 1 win in 17 games. Are you convinced Rob Edwards is the man?
Again, really good question. I've seen enough to suggest that he's been able to get some progression out of this team. I think the context of the squad he inherited is really important as well, because he's been obviously dealt a bad hand, and obviously January was a sort of planning for the future kind of window as well. So he's definitely not had a great hand in the first place. He's also at the same time made mistakes. I think he got the team wrong against Chelsea, got the team wrong against Arsenal. He's got it wrong in other games. I think he's made errors, and there has been some bad performances in there as well. But he has got experience of getting out of the Championship and doing well in the Championship as well. So I think he'd probably, I mean, again, depends on the back end of the season goes. I do think he probably deserves that chance in the Championship. But if you want my opinion, he's got to start well in the Championship as well, because if Wolves are, 14th after 10 games, there might be a decision made. So I think there's I think there'll be an expectation that he's got to go and have a real good crack at it next year as well. So I think that's probably the best way for me to phrase it.
Right. Question from John. Do you really trust this club to get the recruitment right in the summer? That is a big question. Big question, Keno, given the question marks you've had about recruitment in the past. Yeah, I mean, obviously I've been massively critical of recruitment in the past. It's been a disgrace, really, a shambles. So based on that, the answer has to be no. However, I think, again, you've got to be fair here. And Matt Jackson and Nathan Shee are pretty new in their roles, and they haven't really had an opportunity to get it right or get it wrong yet. And I think you have to give them a chance to go and do it. If they get it badly wrong, I'm going to be sat here like a broken record saying the same thing like I have done for the last 2 or 3 years, that they've got it badly wrong. And these are the mistakes they've made. And Wolves are in a bad place. But if they get it right, I'll obviously be saying the opposite. So I think they need a chance to go and do it. I think they need a chance to go and get it right. And I really hope that they do, because this club really desperately needs it. But based on what we've seen in the last few years, it's, Jeff Shee was not listening to the people making football decisions, was making decisions himself. It was a disaster. And Nathan Shee can make sure he listens to people and takes everyone's ideas on board and makes the right decisions. Then in theory, it should be better, but the proof's in the pudding. I'm going to give him the time and space to go and make those right decisions. But I'm also not. It's not just a gimme. It's not just a free reign. And go off without any criticism or any objective analysis. I've got to also look at it, and if anything goes wrong, you call it out straight away. Dolt Thrower is the last question we've got in. Thanks for getting in touch. He's put quite short and simple. How much worse can it get this year? Again, it sort of leads us on to what we've already said. I mean, 10 games it's a really important 10 games, isn't it? The next few ones going into this sort of forced break, obviously, as I've already described, is really important. But then, you finish off April and May knowing that you can't have lost everything. You can't have failed to win. You can't have thrown away opportunities to build a little bit of good feeling and momentum. Because if Wolves end this season with 1 Premier League win, I mean, regardless of beating the Derby record points or not, it's an embarrassment, and the fans will be furious. And Rob Edwards would have had enough opportunities to get more wins on the board. So that's why you've got to go and do better in these next 10 games. But I mean, honestly, I thought they were going to win against Palace. I said that on the podcast, and I had a really good feeling going into the game. And then when I saw the performance, I was feeling pretty pleased with myself. And we all know what happened. But I do think it will get better. I do think they'll get some results. And by the way, what a way to do it if you go and beat Villa at Molineux on Friday night. There we go. And that brings us on nicely to our final part of the podcast. Got a bit tongue-tied there. Final part of the podcast as we preview the clash against Aston Villa. Keno, it was back in the reverse fixture at Villa Park where we kind of saw a spirited performance from Wolves. And on another day, they could have taken something at Villa Park, but as it was a single goal that won the home side the game. It is just about taking this momentum, performances-wise, rather than points into this. I'm trying to get something. You get that point. That Derby record is starting to tumble. Then, do you see Rob Edwards maybe going from the off like he did in the second half against Arsenal, really, or kind of after that injury against Arsenal, where Wolves had a lot more joy? And if he does that, what do you think the score prediction could be?
Yeah, I think he has to go with the two strikers and go with that sort of system that he's been playing. Aside from when he's made the odd change, but I think he has to go with that. It hasn't really worked. Armstrong playing up there on his own. Tolu, I think he's not been playing particularly well, and I've got my reservations about him and his sort of quality as a player. But what he does do is he's really awkward and he gets in the way and he makes it difficult for defenders and it opens space up for other people. I think based on the system and how Wolves are playing, I think he has to be playing and has to start. So, and obviously Hwang I think the plan is that they're going to get him back in training this week, I think is the idea. So it depends whether he's fit to make the squad or not. I mean, this is very early days because we're not speaking to Rob in the press conference until Thursday. And then obviously it depends how this week goes. But if you could ask me to guess right now, I would probably say that he won't make the Villa game, but will maybe make the midweek against Liverpool next week. But yeah, either or, he might be back. But regardless of that, I think you still have to go with those two up top, Armstrong and Tolu. I think Bellegarde has to play. I mean, to be honest, it's probably pretty similar to what we saw against Palace in terms of the starting 11. I would have Rodrigo Gomez come in for my money. Obviously, Krejci can't play; he's going to be suspended. That's a big decision there because there was only half an hour left to play when Krejci got sent off, and I did wonder whether Totti would have been the option because it sort of gives him that half an hour, building him up to then starting a game. So you've got a decision then. Do you play Totti from the start when he's missed more than 2 months with a hamstring injury? Or do you play David Moller-Wolf as part of a back three? That's your only other option, really. Or you play Matt Doherty on the wrong side, who can play there. So there's a few options there to fill that left side gap, but they've got to find a solution to that. Otherwise, and maybe Rodrigo Gomez coming in, as I say, otherwise it's probably a pretty similar 11 to the Palace game, in my opinion. But what it has to be is a team that is well up for it and gets those fans well up for it straight away. The fans will be up for it anyway because of what the game is and the derby and all that. But you've got to give them something. It's all down to the players. The fans will be there. You've got to give them something to ride with, to go with you. And if Wolves start well, I mean, don't get me wrong, the Villa side have obviously had a good season. They've got some good players, but they're not impenetrable. Villa can be got at, absolutely, and they have dropped points. So I think it's a really good opportunity for Wolves just to right a couple wrongs and maybe see the Palace game as a real missed opportunity, a real mess up, and think, right, we can right this here and go and get something. So I'm not going to go for a Wolves win, as much as I think they can win the game. Don't get me wrong, but I'm going to go with a 1-1 draw, some positivity out of it, and Wolves move forward into a Liverpool double header. Where, whisper it, by the way, Wolves should play a stronger team in the FA Cup than they should do in the league, in my opinion. I'm sure we'll have a poddy. I mean, in fact, I'm not sure. We need to figure out whether we're going to have one before the Liverpool league game or not. But either way, there'll be one before the FA Cup game. So we'll come back and chat about Liverpool next week. But yeah, for me, I think I think it has to be seen as an opportunity against Villa rather than something to be worried about, something to be scared of. What have you got to lose? You go out there and you play and you try and make the fans proud.
Yeah, an opportunity to replicate what they did against Arsenal. Hopefully, go one better. Keno, great to chat with you as always. Wolves fans, thank you for your questions. Thank you very much for listening. And until next time on the E&S Wolves podcast. From me and Keno, goodbye.
Wolverhampton Wanderers hopeful this time they can do the business.